Legacy of a Traitor, Chapter 13. There blossomed a vicious rivalry between the King Shields and Swords. As every expansion grew more vicious and swift, every rebellion was quelled with an increasingly fiendish execution. King Genra watched all of them with nothing but a smile, one contorted by thoughts twisting inside him. Whatever they were, I could only imagine. Verse 13 of the Confessional Monolith. So many different kinds of creatures roamed about in the far reaches of the valley. Some were underground, squirming or sleeping almost like they were dead, but not quite. Many larger beasts still roamed even on this frosted crown of the valley, both furry and hairy types, such as a few terrified piggies very similar in shape and size to the rotund tusked one called Snuffler. Finally, Weapon noticed many creatures in that realm where only clouds had reigned. They were tiny, even considering how far away they were, and Weapon couldn't even observe them. Nevertheless, the unrestrained jubilation at seeing so many wonders more than made up for that minor disappointment. Am I not supposed to be watching the two who, I repeat, will never be my friends? Clarence was still grumpy. How unfortunate. Weapon observed quickly in response, and the small campsite on the plateau plain revealed itself, alongside Cully and Snuffler, both chatting about something by a small fire they'd somehow brought to life. Weapon wasn't entirely sure how they did that, but it made sense that both of them would want to be a little warmer. It was now cold enough for Cully that he began to keep his sunny hair wrapped up under a thick, soft cloth, and all that could be seen was his pale face, though it was now accentuated by big red circles on his cheeks, which Weapon found rather cute on a human. It made him look like one of the pouch-mouthed rodents. He was learning so many bits of information about how everything worked, and one of those was that everyone liked temperatures where you didn't need any coverings to remain nice and healthy. Weapon only had the appearance of clothes, and was still quite comfortable, so what sort of really cold temperatures would Weapon find displeasing? Was there a coldest temperature in all of existence? Would Weapon still feel comfortable in it? Such thoughts were interrupted by a sudden smell that billowed across the whole plateau, a smell that reminded him of the dining hall before everything got covered in blood. That smell was of a meal of unsurpassed quality, and Weapon could now eat such a meal. He sped across the plain in his squirrely form, making great leaps and bounds that only made divots in the snow every 10 feet. Both Cully and Snuffler leapt back in surprise, and the forager almost dropped his delicious food as Weapon stopped suddenly at the very edge of the small campsite, forming back into his hooded self. "Whoa! Clarence, is that you? What was that for? You got snow all over us!" Snuffler agreed with him, tropping up to Weapon and grunting angrily. The bouncy voice laughed. "How in all the world did you two survive for so long up here? Any bear or army of stoats could have overwhelmed you slackers, and stolen all of that savory stuff you have there in a heartbeat." "Well, I don't know what a bear is, and any stoat we've ever seen arrived alone, and always graciously begs for a morsel before we give it." He stopped and smirked. "If it kicked up a bunch of snow in our faces, it would have to beg for forgiveness first before it would even get a chance to ask for any of this." With that, Cully began taking the slice of seared and salted flesh and eating it right before Weapon. If he took too long to beg for forgiveness, it would be all gone. Quickly, Clarence had to beg now, whatever that was. It was of the utmost importance. "Are you certain you should be trying to ask a spirit to stoop so low?" Clarence growled at Cully, falling to his knees and bowing over and over. "Ah, so that is what it meant to beg. If Weapon ever saw a stoat do such a thing, it would be so adorable that Weapon might even give it 2 fragments of food." Regardless, it seemed like his performance was enough for Cully, and though Snuffler still glared at Weapon, the boy swung the eating utensil towards him, and a small morsel flew through the air. Weapon's jaw widened, and he leapt up, entrapping the little item inside his mouth. Ah! It was bursting with such heat and flavor, making the very essence of the flesh leak out and mix with the crystal minerals and dried plants, transforming them into pure, enraptured pleasure in a physical form. It was only a single piece, and before Weapon had realized it, it had already dissolved and vanished in his mouth, leaving behind such a happy and dancing aftertaste. If the fruit had been like the soft snow, then that was like the perfect mixture of squirrel chitter-chatter among the shuffling of dry leaves into a whirlwind of color. "Huh, you really liked that." Cully looked almost impressed, and Weapon realized he had been rolling about on the snow, a long and contented rumble emanating from his whole body. Snuffler was busy chewing a piece of the same meal, and looked much happier as well. All the tension had been greatly diminished throughout the pig's form, though even now Snuffler sent over little snorts of displeasement towards Weapon. Did Snuffler dislike Weapon the same way that Clarence disliked Cully? What a predicament indeed. However, beyond all of that, it was clear that such a tiny morsel was no full meal indeed. As Weapon saw the rest of the tasty flesh disappear down Cully's gullet, his eyes and nose and observation quickly sought out another tasty thing. Almost immediately, a small slab of something that smelled of strangely enticing berries sprung up at him. It was clear that Cully wasn't going to be eating something else right now, and it was possible that the slab would become less tasty if they waited any longer. Weapon had to know what it was. He quickly moved over to the bag of many strange items that Cully carried, and despite a quick squeal of warning from Snuffler, Weapon pulled out the item quickly. So, what sort of soap is this exactly? Though it smells similar, it's no food. Why was Clarence saying that? Of course it was food. Why else would it come in a handy mouth-sized bar form? Time for a bite. A moment later, Weapon finally understood the concept of betrayal. What had seemed like yet another soon-to-be joyous occasion had turned into pure revulsion. Every last tidbit of the flesh had utterly vanished, replaced by a horrid feeling that emanated from the tiny, hateful being in his mouth, one that clawed to get out with a poisonous aura, and one that Weapon wasted no time in expelling with as much force as was possible. As a chewed chunk of soap hit the snow, it was joined by the other, smaller piece that had been in Weapon's hand. How horrible! Its effects still remained in his mouth. Was this a curse because Weapon had been greedy? Well, Weapon was sorry. Cully looked at Weapon with a confused look on his face, and that hurt almost as much as the taste. But then he handed over a circular skin that Weapon observed as being full of a very clean portion of water. Here, swish this about in your mouth, and that should help with any residue. Fool, Clarence hissed, but Weapon took the water and dumped the whole of it into his mouth, shaking his head back and forth to catch all of the wretched taste. And though it felt worse for half a moment, the second he released it all out into the snow again, the relief was immediate. The slight remnants of the taste remained, but they were fading fast. Weapon felt very thankful to Cully. So, do you mind telling me what that was about? First, I don't recall saying you could root around in my stuff, but I can't for the life of me imagine how you could say that and then take such a bite out of it. Snuffler grunted, laying over the bag, guarding it from Weapon. As if Weapon had any desire to root through that again. Cully continued, circling Weapon while staring at him. Also, how did you know I had that in my bag? Have you been spying on me ever since the village, or can you see through cloth? My, so many questions. I suppose I do owe you something for that display, so I shall answer that last one. Yes, I can see into your bag, as I can see into any heart and any hidden vessel. Ah, Clarence was trying to avoid the embarrassing mistake. Weapon felt quite bad about it, as it had been once again all his fault. Clarence had said that it wasn't food, but then why did he still eat it with Weapon? The bouncy voice always said many things that Weapon didn't really understand, but was it actually all outward bluster to make everyone else think that he was smart? Cully simply smiled. In that case, you should know that I'm thinking of a great opportunity for a friend to help another friend pay for a wasted bar of Mr. Ralph's best soap. With that, he began to pack up the camp, dousing the fading fire with snow and folding everything else into the satchels. When we reach the peak, I've got an idea that you are going to absolutely love. Weapon was intrigued, though Clarence just chuckled. That's going to take you at least an hour at your slow pace. Fine, we'll see if you somehow know more than a powerful spirit. Cully returned the laugh with one of his own. Well, this simple human knew that soap doesn't taste like it smells, so I think I'll take that bet. Ooh, Cully knew how to poke with words too. Clarence glowered, but didn't even respond to that, and Weapon returned to the snow, excited to explore even more while he waited. Though he'd messed up his one meal for the day, the anticipation for whatever Cully was about to show him had already helped Weapon to move right past it. Cully had been right about everything so far, so this was going to be great. As the time slowly whiled away, Weapon tried to get a better sight of the winged creatures, as he had an excellent idea. If the Markelts and Rotrars were on the other side of the mountain, he could take the form of one who flew above all others, and then look down at both Cully and the enemies at the same time. Both missions would be complete at once. After about half an hour had passed, and dozens of creatures were watched, Weapon was pretty sure he had a good idea of what to do. The memory of their shape was quickly restored in Weapon's mind, as vivid as the rest of the world around him. It was nothing detailed compared to the creatures he'd observed, much less the intricacies of the squirrel, but it was certainly enough. Within a few seconds, Weapon's form had shifted into that of a big, arrow-feathery and hook-beaked beast. He flapped his arms once, twice, and leaped into the air, ready to take to the skies and master yet another domain. To his surprise, he came crashing down onto the snow, getting some of the dirt beneath caught onto his pointed mouth. It didn't taste nearly as bad as the soap, and he was able to spit it out quickly, but he was left rather confused. Was this failure because he was starting on the ground and not high up in the air? There were a lot of tall trees and half-shattered structures up at the top of the mountain. If he were to climb one of those and leap off in the winged form, he might be able to fly. Weapon grinned and began to follow after Cully and Snuffler, who had moved way faster than he'd expected and were already almost there. Bah, what small and light bodies those birds have. To take that same shape with such a large and imposing figure would surely be a fruitless gesture. How strange. Clarence's typically bouncy voice hadn't been bouncing as much recently. Was it because Weapon had been too focused on everything else and had been forgetting to listen to him? Just thinking back over the past few hours showed this to be true, and Weapon felt ashamed. All these troublesome ideas were just making Clarence all grumpy and sad. He shifted back into the hooded figure, and decided that if Clarence didn't want to get more dirt in his mouth, then neither did Weapon. Isn't it nice to listen to reason? There we are. Some of that bounciness was already back in Clarence's voice. Weapon agreed. Reason was a very nice thing, and it stood to reason that Cully might know how to improve the bird problem, since he was so smart and friendly. Plus, Weapon was sure that if he could get Cully to help him out even more, Clarence would grow to like him in return. It only took a couple of minutes to reach the pair, who were standing on the very top of the mountain, though it was a small mountain indeed compared with the other two to the left and the right. They were staring down the other side of the mountain, though there was so much snow that even Weapon couldn't see anything but a dark and pale white sky. That was a bit of a shame, as the valley behind them was so vast and pretty, what with all of the land covered in gold and red, and the citadels glistening like white crystals among them, and the whole land surrounded by steep walls of snow and stone thousands of feet high. The whole of the valley must stretch on for more than 50 miles. If the opposite side of the mountains were even bigger, that would have been breathtaking to see, and Weapon didn't even need to breathe. Oh well, with the snowstorm, the ruins were far more interesting. The structure was quite similar to some of the houses in the village, but this one didn't have any sort of roof, and much of the stone itself had been crumbling down for a long, long time. Is that what happened to buildings if no one lived in them? Did the buildings feel sad when that was the case? Well, no, that didn't make sense. Every building Weapon had seen in the village didn't ever seem to be alive in the first place, but life still poured out from them. The only one that he could sense death in at all was the big fortress, and that was just because it had stopped growing. How could a thing be both alive and dead and neither all at once? How confusing these ruins were to inspire such thoughts. As they approached the pair, both of which were on top of a stony block nearly twice Cully's height, Weapon was surprised to observe that his friend's fear had returned. It was still deep and intense, but fading rapidly. After a moment, the boy smiled and turned around only to jump back again as he saw Weapon standing right before him. More fear, though this was the fun and spiky kind that shifted quickly into crimson shame.
Clarence, you scared the life out of me!
Clearly not. I've yet to meet a corpse that sounded half as whiny as that. Cully just sighed and climbed down the structure with remarkable grace, using his pick to catch the side of the stone like a claw. So that was how he moved up the cliff so quickly. Snuffler followed, the pig's big hooves catching the juts in the rock just as easily. Before Weapon followed them, he realized that this would be a perfect place to try the wings, though he had promised Clarence not to go all out with such ideas, so maybe just half wings would be better. The edges of his mock cloak fused to Weapon's arms, and though the fall was still fast and the ground just as hard as usual, Weapon could feel the air lifting him up ever so slightly. Flying with wings wasn't within his grasp yet, but a slower fall was certainly possible. However, Clarence was too focused on Cully's faults to criticize Weapon. You seem to be worried sick over something up there. Don't tell me you're scared of those outsiders.
Me? Scared of some merchants?
Cully laughed.
Of course not. We just gave each other a fright last time we met, so I just wanted to be sure that they don't have any bad blood.
Before Weapon could ask what it meant to have bad blood, as he could only picture some sort of sickly green gushing from a wound, and while that would certainly scare someone, it didn't sound right, Cully crossed his arms and said,
Alright, you boasted about how you can look past solid objects, and I want to see just how observant you are. Look at the ground and tell me if you see anything that's made of metal. It might look like a tiny circle, something sharp like my pick, or anything else.
Oh, how easy that was. This would only take a moment. I am not something to be commanded, so I'll do so because I want to, not because you desire it. Silly Clarence, Weapon would do it for both those reasons at once. He looked down and began to observe, specifically searching for anything beyond rocks, dirt, or any sleeping creatures. If there was something neat, maybe they could dig it up together. That sounds like something friends would do. Though, there wasn't much here. Just some tiny pieces of glass, lots and lots of bones, and... Weapon froze as a glorious, beautiful, and most importantly familiar object appeared only 5 feet below a small slab of stone right next to Snuffler. How was it here? Even all of the markings were still there, and unlike all of the other tiny pieces of metal at the fringes of his vision, this one thing to ever hurt Weapon, this great sword of Lord Theron, was not marred or rusted at all. Weapon needed to see it. He needed to take it, observe it, and know just how to control it. A truly wondrous treasure lies beneath us, right there, only a few feet deep. With that, Snuffler immediately began digging, so Weapon shifted into the same piggy form and joined in the fun. The boar immediately redoubled its efforts, as if determined not to lose to Weapon, but Weapon didn't care. The prize was far better than any competition. With all the dirt flying and Cully desperately trying to keep up by shoving aside the debris, it took barely a couple of minutes before the dark silver sheen of the wide blade pierced through the ground, and Weapon raised it to light for the first time in what must have been so long. That's incredible. Cully just stared at the sword with eyes almost as wide as when Weapon had scared him. This thing's gotta be worth thousands of Cerny alone. I don't even know what it is. It looks like a giant spearhead, but you'd need a huge giant to wield it. It was certainly wielded by a giant, but not like a spear. Had Cully never seen a sword before? That brought a smile to Weapon's face. It was now his turn to teach Cully. The memory of Lord Theron returned, and Weapon moved in the same way that he had, striking the air with swift and elegant moves. Once, twice, thrice, all in a moment, the blade swung forward, each time returning to defend. How wonderful and thrilling to use it was! However, despite the speed, Weapon couldn't help but feel as if it was somehow slower in his hands than it had been when used against him. With this, Clarence boasted, you can see that there is no man or beast alive who could face me. Cully had taken a step back at the flurry of blows, but Weapon could tell that he was impressed from the shine in his eyes. I see. So this must be what Father was talking about when he spoke of legendary armaments used by kings of old. Why was such a weapon buried all the way up here? I know I've found smaller tools in the past, but nothing like this. Did the Genra Knights just leave this behind too? Weapon spun the blade with a flourish and stuck it into the ground all in the same impressive motion. If they left it here, it seems the Cerniers are as bumbling and lacking in all the usual ways of war as I'd expected. Why, I don't think they even wanted to think about it. You see, if this sword is perfect for killing other people yourself as a king, how in the world would that little pip of a squeak ever even lift this thing? Cully had picked up the sword from the ground and was analyzing it alongside Snuffler, who sniffed the shiny metal suspiciously. However, as Weapon said that, he glanced up with an oddly similar suspicion as his pig. You've seen Lord Cernier before. When was that exactly? It seemed that Cully didn't like Master Cernier very much. How confusing it was to try and keep track of who liked whom, and who still needed to become friends with each other. Fortunately, Clarence calmed the situation down nice and easily. Why would you even bother asking a wandering spirit of such a thing? I've seen many, many people in the valley, and I can say that I judge them for every little mistake they make. My, do some of them make a lot of silly mistakes. Naturally, the one called Cernier falls into that category. I see. Well, pigs of a passel are quite the hassle. No offense, Snuff. Either way, we need to keep this sword nice and safe somewhere we can find it again. No. Weapon wanted to keep it with him for as long as was possible, at least until he could make a new one. To even think of burying such a pretty thing again was agonizing. And where, Cullion, would it be safer than in the hands of an incredibly skilled spirit? Clarence grinned. I might even be able to use it to protect you, if you and Snuffler find yourselves too scared to run from a particularly ferocious bunny rabbit, or whatever else it is that has the two of you so riled up. Cully paused in thought for a moment, and Weapon could tell that the excitement inspired by the prospects rushing about his mind was too profound to allow for any annoyance at all. Well, I won't be returning to the valley for at least a few more days, so sure, you can hold on to it until then. In return, I'd like to offer you a deal. He sat down on the snow, gesturing Weapon to do the same. Oh, this must be a formal agreement. So long as it didn't contradict the orders that Master Cernier had given, Weapon had no problem hearing the proposition of a friend. That vision of yours is spectacular, but I can tell that you're new to this world. I won't ask where you came from, especially if that would draw you back, but I'll teach you all about how this world works, all the little details of how to use the elements, the best things to eat, and so much more. What a good friend this Cully was! He was so nice that he even made Clarence freeze up for a moment, probably because of just how shockingly great of a human he was.
In return, you will continue to travel with myself and Snuffler during the rest of our journey here, and in any of our next expeditions. She's still a better hunter than you when it comes to my usual quarry, but old relics of the past don't really carry any specific scent. Together, as a team, our safety, wealth, and knowledge will be secure, no matter who rules the valley. So, do we have a deal?
Cully flashed a rather charming grin. It reminded Weapon of his own, and the boy held out his hand. I don't know. I could very easily learn without you.
As a bonus lesson, you make a deal with someone by holding his hand in yours, and we shake together. That forms a strong promise.
Of course I know what you are doing. Handshakes are well known to me already. What? No, Weapon had no knowledge of that before. Weapon was surprised at Clarence. Why would he possibly refuse such a perfect arrangement? Master Cernier told Weapon to find and keep Cully safe, and Cully's desire is for Weapon to keep him safe, and to remain as friends for even longer. It was a win for everyone, but a double win for Weapon. Plus, it was even better than being ordered to do something, because now the orderer had to do something in return. This will be a cause for regret, Clarence moaned as Weapon grabbed Cully's hand with 3 hands and shook it vigorously. Both Cully and Weapon's grins were extra wide.
Great, and you won't regret this. Trust me on that.
Cully stood up and stretched.
It's getting late, so let's make camp for the night.
He glanced at Weapon.
Here's a great chance for our first exchange. If you can find us a nice and dry area somewhere nearby for us to sleep in, I'll teach you all about the most delicious kind of thing in the entire world.
The most delicious thing in the entire world? Weapon had barely learned about the most delicious thing in the valley, let alone the whole world. He shot off even before Clarence could say anything. His energy was radiating with every kind of excitement. Now he had a friend both in word and in dealings, and Lord Theron's sword was his to observe and learn about even more. Using the same little hook that he'd used for the circlet of food earlier that morning, he attached the beautiful blade to it, and was pleased to know that unlike the bits of bread, it wouldn't fall apart. How could this day get any better? The whole time they ran, Clarence was really grumbly. How do I know that this child is trustworthy? He might tell us that some kind of poison is the tastiest kind of food, then stab us while we writhe on the ground. He desires wealth more than friendship. I can see it in his eyes. He just wants to sell me, or my own corpse. It was getting annoying with how annoyed Clarence was. Did he really want to eat more soap and feel so terrible again? Cully had been nothing but nice and helpful, so why was there so much anger? An idea flashed through Weapon's mind, and he smiled at how right it was. Was Clarence jealous? Well, Weapon loved both Clarence and Cully, but Cully seemed to be much smarter, so he would listen to Cully for now. The grumbling continued even as Weapon found a lovely fallen tower a few 100 feet down the mountain. He could observe very little water within, and so he broke down one of the sides by hitting it hard with the greatsword. It only took 8 swings before a makeshift little cavern was complete. Even when hitting rocks, it still remained nice and shiny, and the markings on the side glowed even more. Weapon still didn't know what they were, but when he had the chance to observe it properly, maybe they would become nice and clear. When Cully and Snuffler finally arrived, the sun's light had finally disappeared. The sun itself was already hidden by the swirling and whooshing storm, but Weapon was still sad to see it completely go away. It seemed that it would return again in just a few hours, so there was little cause for such sadness, especially when his 2 friends were so happy. Weapon was proud that he had caused them so much joy as they kept going on about no more soggy bedspreads and how nice and warm this was.
Well, this is way better than I even thought possible. Great job.
Cully laid back, using Snuffler's contented frame as a way to cushion his head, and he pulled out a little piece of paper from his satchel.
As promised, take a look at this.
Weapon quickly scurried over, shifting into the many-legged form. To his surprise, Cully didn't even jump. On the slightly crumpled paper was an image of some sort of dark and domed lumpy thing. A mushroom? This is the greatest feast ever? Clarence laughed. I'll have you know that I can recognize poison when I see it, and a lone wild mushroom is just the very thing that a simpleton uses to try and trick me.
Yeah, I guess it looks like a mushroom, but that means you've definitely never seen this before.
Cully grinned.
This right here is what we call stone gut. It is very rare, and only grows deep within the rocky cliffs of the higher peaks of the Carafel Mountains. However, you can put it into a soup pot, and the whole thing will become a broth that is both perfectly filling and amazingly restorative. And on top of that, it's pretty close to what I imagine a feast in the next valley tastes like.
Even Clarence was curious at that. So it's as tasty as something I can't compare it to. Where is this next valley? Is that some sort of culinary caldera? Cully's form suddenly tensed slightly, and he forced a grin onto his face.
Yeah, it's where we go when we die, and it's better than everything here, I think. But I wasn't sure if you were from there or not, so I didn't want to drag you back there by mentioning it. Sorry, I didn't think of it till now.
How interesting. If Cully thought that he was from this happy valley beyond death, then was it possible that he was? In that very first place he could remember, the one with the flitting white light in the space slightly larger than this tower cavern, where the deep voice that rumbled into the ground told him he was ready, was that in the next valley? He hadn't known it then, but now Weapon knew that it had been a truly miserable place, a pit that had never seen the sun. No, that place was certainly not the next valley. It couldn't be. But then where was Weapon from? Was that pit even the first place Weapon had ever seen? No, there was something else. Something that reached from beyond memory, beyond instinct, that shone like sunlight in Weapon's mind, but it wasn't sunlight. What was it? The whimpering, ever-present voice in the back of his mind grew louder. What a reward that was, showing a glorious mountain Mycon and had not even been able to properly describe it! Clarence spoke quickly and loudly, forcing Weapon and the voice out of his thoughts. Enjoy your wonderful little hut. I'm off to properly keep this sword safe. With that, Weapon jumped into the snow outside, still carrying the blade. How strange. Clarence was scared again. Did he not like the lightless pit either? In the memory, Weapon was satisfied, but maybe now all of the new experiences had changed it.
Right, I'll see you then, and I'll have something even better, I promise.
Weapon was happy to hear Cully's earnestness, especially after his tense concern. However, it was strange. Despite how good it was, Cully feared that other valley somehow. Or no, it wasn't quite fear. It was anger. What a mystery this next valley was! But for now, Weapon was ready to focus on another more immediate and exciting mystery. He reached a small grove of leafless trees within eyesight of the little cave, unhooked the blade, and began to observe it. He would take in the very form of every little fold and wrinkle, every glistening marking that could not be read, and he would make this wonderful blade his own. All the while, the memory of the day filled so much of Weapon's mind. He had found a friend, he had fixed a squirrel, he had been given a new task, one that he was completing perfectly. All that was left to do was to greet the sun, and then greet the outsiders once and for all.
As the morning broke, Cullen was delighted to find that this was the first night he and Snuffler had camped in the snowy peaks that hadn't resulted in chattering teeth and frozen supplies. The little cavern created by the ruin had kept them warm all night, and it had left him in a great mood. However, Clarence was nowhere to be seen. Cullen sighed. The capriciousness of that creature was incredible. Though he clearly desired to help them on their quest, he acted like a child, unaware of some pretty simple things, almost as if he had come from a different land entirely. Cullen touched the ebony stone at his chest. The spirit had grown antsy and distressed after mentioning the next valley. Was it a servant from there? Did she send it? He shook his head to clear his mind, though his heart ached for that to be true. Snuffler yawned and nudged Cullen a couple of times until he began scratching her head. Morning, Snuff. Say, did you see where our new friend went with the sword? She snorted dismissively and flopped onto her side for an improved experience. Cullen gladly obliged, giving her proper double-handed scratches all over. Snuffler's senses had never been wrong, so why was she still concerned about Clarence? You're not jealous, are you, girl? Don't worry, I think you're much smarter than it. At least you know not to eat soap. She grunted happily at that, and remained in a good mood as Cullen organized the traveling materials until a loud thump struck the outside of the cave. He waved at the spirit. Good morning to you as well. I was beginning to wonder if you had up and abandoned us. Nice to see you're an honorable sort. Oh, don't you worry. I wouldn't renege on a promise the day I made it. So why exactly were you so desperate to see me? Well, firstly, are there any other old metal items like this one? Especially any in great condition like it? Clarence's eyes turned a dark gray again, before shifting back momentarily. Cullen blinked. He had found that to be somewhat unnerving to see earlier, and it was somehow even creepier in the dark. Well, unless you're interested in old bones, I can't say there's much besides crumbled stone and squirming insects. Hey, at least you tried. My turn. He moved to the mouth of the cave and took out the little tinderbox. So, do you know what this is? Do you truly think me so simple that I wouldn't recognize a fire-starting kit? I don't think this deal of ours will work out, so why don't we ignore it for the time? Right, just like how you knew how tasty soap was last night. Cullen smirked as the spirit whimpered quietly about that being an unfair example, and he started setting up a small fire site. I'll show you how to cook a proper breakfast with this once it's ready, and this time, you can properly enjoy it. Once the tinder and kindling was in place, he began to spark the flint and steel. Whippen stared at the flashes, and as the flame began to slightly catch on the tinder, the spirit reached down and grabbed the tiny fire. Cullen was too surprised to say anything more than, "Don't, it's hot!" And the spirit let out a howl of pain as the hand shifted and split, and it thrust its whole arm into the snow outside. Snuffler jumped back at the sound, in shock that such a creature would do something so ridiculous.
"Foolish!"
Clarence hissed, reprimanding himself. Cullen still didn't quite understand why it spoke with such eloquence and experience, then acted so childishly.
"Of course trying to pull the fire out wouldn't work. It is growing, not hidden away."
Clarence continued the self-correction, but fortunately he somehow seemed to be unharmed. Even so, Cullen asked if he was hurt.
"Not at all. Don't take me for a delicate fop. The sudden bite simply scared me for a moment."
After a few more minutes of sparking and softly blowing the glowing tinder, minutes which were thankfully devoid of any further frights, an excellent little campfire had sprung to life. And that's how you make a little fire. It's a good thing you learned how hot it was with such a small flame. I don't care how tough you are. Any roaring fire will leave a mark on you for weeks. Clarence wasn't too chatty for the rest of the time, though his smile returned in full force after tasting the beef strips doused in onion powder. They were good, especially with such an excellent fire, but the texture wasn't great in Cullen's opinion. Snuffler continued to enjoy her apples as Cullen watched Clarence. It was certainly odd. He enjoyed food more than almost anything, and every meal seemed to be a brand new experience for him. If he didn't come from the next valley, was he from someplace far worse? Cullen wanted to ask him, but he knew just how snappish the spirit got whenever he brought his past up. In his father's stories, there had been spirits who desired to help humans constantly, though usually just with sweeping up dust or cleaning dishes, who only asked for bits of food in return. However, they would turn into fierce and terrible monsters the minute you captured them or asked them too many questions. Was Clarence something similar? If so, it would be wise to simply appreciate his presence and hope for the best. The sky was much clearer than it had been yesterday, but snow still blew about with wild abandon, covering the ground in a few inches of the stuff. Everything was packed up, Snuffler's vest was nice and snug, and Clarence still carried around that enormous knife. It was time. The merchants hadn't made it up to the pass yet, but they were close. Cullen nodded to Snuffler. "You ready, girl? Let's hope we don't need any blood flies this time."
"Of course you won't. I'm here now."
The spirit chuckled, clearly in a much better mood than earlier. Cullen gave him a thumbs up, and they continued down, hearts ablaze. Before moving past the ruins and into the sloped clearing, the reminder of a very similar clearing 1 week ago stayed Cullen's boot. "Say, can you see any tiny red flowers under all this snow? These fellows are a bit overzealous when it comes to defending this place, even before my encounter." Cullen took out the crimson flower bud from his satchel. "They should look something like this." The spirit looked and observed it closely.
"Though it certainly seems like a simple flower at first, there is some sort of strange and spooky powder within. My, this stuff is volatile and ready to erupt."
Clarence chuckled.
"I'm glad that purse of yours is so soft. This thing should have exploded many times over. And to answer your question, of course I can. Why, there lie around us nearly 12 little alarms within a paltry 50 feet.
Cullen whistled. "Impressive. They really don't want any more surprises, huh? Nice going, Clarence." He grinned. With Snuffler able to track down any natural scents, and Clarence able to find any man-made items, there was nothing that could hide from them.
"Ah, Cullen, might I make a recommendation?"
Clarence spoke with a smile that implied he had every intention of telling him regardless of his answer. Well, whatever it would be, it was bound to be at least a little useful. "Go for it," Cullen said, carefully stepping in the tracks the spirit was making and ensuring they were close enough for Snuffler to follow through easily. Clarence's proud tone was almost a purr.
"If we don't want another sudden confrontation, why don't we try to announce ourselves to them directly? And if we do that, why not with a truly impressive entrance? Let's grab every one of these things and fling a whole bunch at once against that tree by their camp's gate. If you want to get their attention and impress them at the same time, this is the way to do it. They won't think it's an attack if you do just the one throw, then stand in full sight of them without any sign of fear."
That was a rather bold plan, yet Cullen couldn't help liking the guts behind it. If it worked, then his relationship with the outsiders would be far better than any amount of sneaking would ever accomplish.
and Clarence's confidence in the success of this plan was quite contagious. Even so, the possibility of retaliation was still very concerning, and the memory of their aggression sent another shiver down Cullen's spine. He sighed, then nodded. All right, but if we do reveal ourselves, we should probably stand at least a stone's throw away. I told you they were jumpy, and this is just the sort of thing that might rile them up. Well, that's easily avoided. Just announce that you come in peace as loud as your silky soft voice can muster. Silky soft? Cullen could hear himself, and he sounded more soothingly rugged than whatever that meant. Nevertheless, he shook his head. I don't know if that part will work, though. You know that these outsiders don't speak my language, right? They've some sort of tongue that rises and falls with every sentence, and if I've never heard of it before, chances are they won't understand mine. My father called it a language barrier, and said that he had to deal with it all the time back when merchants came to visit. The spirit's grin only grew wider. How fortuitous, then, that we have met. You see, I know every language spoken by you humans under the stars and the sun. I can provide all the translation you need. Cullen stared at Clarence in surprise. Was this spirit from some further reality after all? Such an ability sounded downright divine. It continued in a droning, thoughtful tone. Though, since the effect of a lone figure standing upon the crest of a hill is so much better than two, I'll have to camouflage myself. It snapped its fingers. Ah, I know just the thing. You can't look imposing and impressive if you don't have a flowing cloak. Cullen glanced at him incredulously. I've worn such things in the past. They can be nice in a rainstorm, but they catch on everything, and good luck trying to climb in one of those. The spirit sighed. I suppose you'll just have to accept that your sense of fashion is rather atrocious. With that, it leapt upon Cullen's shoulders, pouncing like some sort of beast, and Snuffler squealed a warning. Fortunately, Clarence was nowhere near as heavy as he might have seemed in his humanoid form, though the forager stumbled for a moment, trying to keep his balance as the creature shifted, altering the weight. The spirit was growing lighter as he morphed into a flat covering that extended nearly 10 feet behind Cullen, wrapping about his neck and covering his mouth with a surprisingly cushy scarf. After only a moment, the transformation was complete. My, even with such non-existent wind about this place, I still create quite the spectacular image. Clarence's voice came from the opposite side of the scarf near Cullen's mouth, making his wide, sharp grin almost appear as a mask. The cloak itself was slightly tattered as it waved like some sort of banner, but even Cullen could tell it was more of a fierce set of intentional tassels than simple wear and tear. It spread wide over his back, casting an impressive shadow over the clearing ahead. Admittedly, he couldn't help but feel a slight sense of pride, despite how utterly useless the thing was as a functional article of clothing. You tell me, Piggums, how does Cully look now? Clarence laughed, and Snuffler took a couple steps back before slowly approaching, sniffing it carefully. After a moment, she seemed satisfied, though unimpressed. Cullen lifted his arms, noting the smooth bend of the Clarence cloak material. Well, you're probably smart enough not to get caught on any branches, but are you sure this looks like something to be respected? Clarence scoffed. Everyone respects me, and now you look just like me, so your question is answered. Less importantly, I can speak for you, and whisper their nonsensical sayings to you in your own tongue. Cold breath suddenly tickled Cullen's left ear as a second mouth opened right next to it. Just like this, it whispered. Cullen shivered. Ugh, yeah, that'll definitely work, but could you keep off of me until then? Besides, I need you to pick up all of the red flowers, and unless this cloak can reach a hole 50 feet away, I don't see that happening. The spirit sighed. Those of refined palates actually like having someone whisper sweet nothings to them, but if you insist. In a whirl of movement, it leapt through the air off of Cullen, and dove beneath the snow like some sort of emaciated fox. Cullen stepped back as it burrowed left and right, zipping back and forth and beneath Snuffler as it hunted for the crimson flowers. Though he knew not to flinch anymore, he was still unnerved by these unnatural transformations. How long would it take before he'd become used to seeing such things? Probably not for a while with all of these strange forms and movements, and doubtless even longer until the spirit's strange words and phrases would sound commonplace. Within a minute, Clarence resurfaced, his flesh reforming smoothly into that of the hooded figure, his hands holding several of the red buds, and his wide grin glowing with self-satisfaction. And there we are, 12 little extra zealous firecrackers. Are you sure your little purse can hold all this explosive excitement? Absolutely. I once had to carry over 20 furred mushrooms, and if even a single one touched the paragraphs, both quarries would be ruined. This is nothing compared to that. As he quickly and carefully added each frightening little orb, he realized that Clarence had gone quiet. Ah, I forgot to mention it, but thanks for that, Spirit.
He closed the latch on the satchel and grinned at the mysterious creature. Honestly, Snuff and I really appreciate you being here, even if she doesn't show it. Clarence seemed caught off guard by that, almost flinching for a moment.
Please, I simply want to see them all erupt at once, so don't think it was some sort of gift for you.
It chuckled and turned away, resuming its uncharacteristic silence. Hey, when facing something unknown, it's surprisingly nice to have something unknown help out in return. Tell you what, the next time we're up in these mountains, the next stone gut Snuffler smells is all yours. She grunted a reluctant affirmation, and the spirit's grin, visible even from behind, widened ever further. As the snow continued to pile higher upon the ground as they continued to descend the mountain, the refreshing air gave way to an odd feeling of apprehension. It was more than just the fact that every step brought them closer to their goal. Cullen felt that there was something almost balefully different about the woods, but he wasn't sure what it was until the scent of something dead blew on the wind. Snuffler bristled, and Cullen could now hear the faint sound of buzzing that sounded like 1,000 tiny saws. Bloodflies. Cullen glanced at Clarence, but the creatures just seemed to look forward at nothing in particular. A quizzical smile blossomed on his morphing face. He knew something that Cullen and Snuffler didn't. Clarence, you're a nature spirit of some sort, so what's happened to this place? Did you do something here? The creature's quizzical grin only grew, but his responding question revealed the answer anyway.
Do these merchants think sticking a bunch of pigs on tree trunks like glorified kebabs gives them a good sense for exterior design? Or is it the flesh-eating bug nests beneath each of them that does the trick? Either way, their attempts at decor look as if they are desperately trying to get a troubled poet to notice them.
Cullen's eyes widened in shock, and Snuffler hesitated to move forward. Stay here a moment, girl. Cullen slipped down the mountainside a bit more, Clarence flowing closely ahead, and soon the grisly sight unfolded before them. His stomach turned, and any hope he had that the outsiders would simply chalk up the incident a week ago to natural happenstance crumbled away. Several trees had been carved with jagged, hacking cuts, shearing off nearly all of the branches and boughs, turning each into a massive pointed pillar. Each one pierced the decaying corpse of a wild mountain boar, speared through the gut. Beneath each boar, a bloodfly hive hung from the only remaining branch, nearly all of the insects infesting and crawling on the boars with such numbers that they almost completely obscured the crimson skin. Nearly 12 of these grim spectacles lined a road that had been further built up, but not a single human was around. Even so, Cullen wanted to hide from the fiendish sight. Why had they done it? Was this some sort of vengeance for Snuffler's attack? A warning to every living creature to not mess with them? In that moment, the absurdity and horror of the bloodfly hives even being there at all struck Cullen. How had they managed to carry them around and fasten them in such a way? That would have been a death sentence for any human. Was their skin made of stone? Were they not human after all? The fear that he had tried to silence for so long began to surge forward again with an intensity that pounded louder and louder at his heart. No, they must have some sort of balm or smoke that causes bloodflies to subside. Even as he thought it, he knew it was a desperate gesture that ignored the horrors before him. His breath began to swirl through the air faster as the world closed in.
Weapon was confused. This array of decomposing death and ravenous life was very odd. He had seen an array of carcasses that were remarkably desirable in the past, but now Weapon realized that those had been heated and adorned with plant matter, specifically transforming them into food. No, all of these bodies in the woods were closer to the aftermath of the mission, and that hadn't been anywhere near as appetizing, not at all. Had something like Weapon completed a mission here? That didn't make sense either, since these corpses had all been killed at different times. Weapon observed that some were almost unrecognizable with the skin fading away and falling apart, while others were only beginning that process. But then why would someone do something so wasteful? As these thoughts passed through Weapon's mind, he suddenly observed an outflow of fear from Cully that felt like a sudden rush of water, like a stream had been stopped up for days and was now unleashed upon the world. How distressing! Weapon didn't want his friend to be scared. Huh, you really like pigs. Clarence gestured to the corpses. I would try to save these ones, but I think they died long ago. Do you want revenge instead?
What?
Revenge! You know, doing the same thing to these perps that they did to the piggies. We can amend our plan, scare them with even more of these flowers, and then stake them on their own logs.
No, there's gotta be a reason for this. If they're this cruel, what in the depths will they do when they reach the valley? There has to be a reason.
Weapon could tell that Cully's fear was increasing more and more with each second. For the first time, he didn't even need to observe to tell that was the case. His friend's face had grown pale, overcoming the cute red of his cold cheeks, and his knees were trembling. Was he all right? Clarence relayed Weapon's question, though harsher than Weapon would have liked. And you were so assured just a few minutes ago. Are you as helpless as a child? Do you need your mommy? The forager flashed him a glare, clutching the stone at his chest. Then he took a deep breath, and Weapon was impressed. The fear within Cully didn't quite subside, and yet his heart grew steady and assured.
Clarence, hand me one of those flowers.
Weapon did as he asked, interested as to what exactly he was planning. Cully then carefully pried open the side of the flower, careful not to let it be struck by any forceful movement, and he let the red dust fall to the snowy ground, marking it like blood. Next, he took a small bottle from his satchel, filled with wood and tiny orange slices of spices, and poured it into the now empty hole in the flower. He reset the bud and nodded assuredly.
All right, let's do this. I'm ready to face them now. They have to be reasoned with, but we needed a few ways out if we fail.
Weapon grinned. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to be spectacular. The camp was only a few hundred feet away, just beyond the very last remnants of the ruined buildings, and Weapon was pleased to see that it looked like another tiny village. There were 2 wooden towers near the only opening, with 2 miserable-looking men on each one staring out towards the mountaintop. This was Weapon's first sighting of the men he was to kill. Or at least, to maybe kill. How strange it was to see someone who was both a person and a target all at once. Each of them was wearing a bulky helmet that covered the whole of their head, though Weapon could observe a huge amount of hair right on their face underneath. That must be rather itchy. On their chests were the same sigils that Master Cernier had shown. The brown one looked like several curves all wrapping into itself to form the approximation of a flower, while the crimson one had a grinning yet emaciated face with empty eyes and sharp horns like tusks growing out of its forehead. Weapon couldn't help but like them. They reminded him of the drawing in the rafter dust. However, those 2 men weren't alone. As they snuck closer and closer, Weapon observed that there were exactly 30 different humans in the camp, most of which were huddled in little, fragile buildings made of cloth. It wasn't just the watching guards. All of them had beards, and all of them were miserable. Weapon thought that wearing such a large amount of hair would make you more defended against the cold, but Cully hadn't complained about the snow yet, so maybe they were just a grumpy people.
This is a new camp. They were further down another few hundred feet at least last time.
Cully looked warily to the left and right.
They built it right at the edge of the pass, too.
Weapon observed in those directions and realized what he meant. There was a sheer cliff face that descended down and down and down. This whole stretch of land was simply a tiny sloping bridge amidst rock that must go down many thousands of feet.
Even if we just wanted to sneak through, this makes it almost impossible.
Cully glanced back to the peak.
I'm glad Snuffler's staying behind. If they saw her, they might just try to attack.
Weapon agreed, though if they did, Weapon would just attack them right back. Cully took one last deep breath, nice and deep to drum up his strength.
Ready, Clarence?
Always. Both Weapon and Clarence grinned as they shifted into a multi-armed version of the cloak, and they stepped out and into the open, 10 crimson orbs in their hands. Weapon had never seen what it looked like when one of the orbs erupted before, and so he stared in awe as the sound of the earth shattering apart exploded out of many at once, a tornado of crimson smoke snapping and cracking over and over, and even sparks of flame illuminated the sky. All of the guards nearly fell off of their towers, and every single one of the men in the camp stood to attention as tension filled them. Then they brandished their blades, curved and spectacular-looking things, and they rushed outside to face the threat. It wasn't just blades they carried, but strange bows and hoops of rope.
Who stands before us, daring to tempt our wrath?
These words were loud and fearless, and the one who spoke them was a rather large man with a voice quite similar to that of the first Master Cernier. He carried with him 2 blades, their depictions each forming half of the curve on the flower sigil on his chest. Weapon was interested, both in the words the spirited man spoke, and how he spoke them. They were made of very different sounds, and yet they communicated similar information, kind of like how the sunny-haired folk sounded different from Master Cernier. This must be the language barrier that Cully spoke of. It was a good thing indeed that no barrier could keep Weapon away.
I hope you know what you're doing,
Cully whispered. He shouldn't have worried. Weapon was already on it. Do you think such tricks can cause me to stumble? I simply cleared the path of your strange bud so I can speak with you undeterred, Flower Lord of Clan Rotrar. Of course he was a lord. Weapon should have been able to tell from his voice and his swords. You ask me who I am, and I shall answer as the destiny you had chosen the moment you climbed these peaks.
You speak in riddles. Are you the promised envoy?
His voice was still sharp, but at least he and his men weren't attacking.
Cullen listened to the harsh tones coming from the imposing figure before him, just about ready to turn and run. That didn't sound peaceful, but fortunately they weren't currently advancing. Clarence whispered from the side mouth.
He asks if you are the envoy. I'd say he's quite to the point.
The envoy? Cullen's brow furrowed. Is an envoy a good thing or a bad thing? Clarence's small mouth grinned.
I suppose it depends on the person. Let's go with yes for now, see what they do.
That sounded rather risky to Cullen, but it seemed Clarence knew what he was doing.
Cully nodded.
I suppose it sounds like the title of a prophesied hero, so go ahead, but be careful.
Clarence called out to the men. I suppose I've been described as an envoy in a manner of speaking. Were you not aware of my arrival? My, the lot of you seem rather skittish. The armored man gestured around himself with rather furious movements, his sword swishing back and forth. Was that how he fought? Weapon could do far better than that.
This promised Aleesland has only brought forth dangers so far. Even the very rain transforms and builds up against us. Does your lord still hold to his word that we are welcome? As Clarence related this, a chill unrelated to the cold crept down Cullen's back. What lord were they talking about? Surely not Lord Cernier, unless he had another version of himself that held entirely different memories and goals. But there was not another person in the whole valley who called himself a lord. Could he have lied? Cullen shook his head. No, Lord Cernier's emotions had been clear. He had been terrified when Cullen described the outsider's arrival. He continued. Tell them, I'm sorry. I don't know what or whose word you are referring to. Please, tell me why you have come to the Caerphillian Valley.
Weapon could tell that Clarence was delighted to hear that from the excitement in his voice, but he wasn't sure why. The bouncy voice began to speak quickly. My lord's word? Why, such a thing doesn't exist to my knowledge. Now tell me the foolish reason why you have dared to enter the wondrous Caerphillian Valley. That was kind of what Cully had said, but it was in such a different tone. Is that what it meant to translate? The Lord of Clan Rochar's face flushed with anger.
What is this? We were promised that this land would be a haven for both of our clans. We offered our most precious materials to you, and you agreed. As Clarence related this to him, Cullen realized that whoever had been speaking to them wanted these merchants to bring over their greatest goods. But they were so aggressive. What they needed was a compromise, something that would give everyone more time to prepare. So you are here to share the wonders of your own faraway lands. Though I'm impressed by your tenacity, it seems you might have been caught by the snowstorm. If you require it, we can probably help you get to someplace warmer, though I should mention that the road to the valley is in grave disrepair, so that will probably have to be somewhere down the side of the mountains you came from. There, please let that work.
You still desire to barter the tools of cavemen with us? No wonder you are stuck in such slight snow. If you desire freedom from this realm, then I will deliver it. You may return to the paltry hell you've lived in all your life, or I'll send you somewhere far warmer myself. What exactly was Clarence doing? He seemed to be getting more and more excited with each message, and Weapon could tell from the rage emanating from the Markelts and Rotrars that a battle was now imminent. Indeed, all of the hairy men were now advancing, and the leader was calling for Cully's blood. Clarence let out a roaring laugh unlike any Weapon had heard since the dining hall. What a shame! It seems that diplomacy has failed. They are now our targets, so take your pick and flee from here.
The cloak form leapt off of Cullen's back and formed into the hooded figure, now brandishing the sword as the boy's heart sank. He'd failed, and now they were coming to kill him. Fear overwhelmed him, and he stumbled in the snow, then began a mad dash back to the peak as sounds of screams and hideous laughter rose behind him. Clarence would be fine. He was a spirit, but Cullen needed to keep Suffler safe. He had over 100 feet on the outsiders. He would make it in time. He had to.
Though there was no yellow gong to signal the slaughter, Weapon realized that Clarence had simply followed Master Cernier's orders perfectly. He had tried to get them to turn back, but they had refused, and now they were nothing more than targets. It had been at least a few days since the mission in the dining hall, but now every fiber of Weapon's being was ready to do what he had always known how to do. Despite all of the questions, all of the exploration, all of the food, Weapon knew that he learned the quickest in battle, and so he and Clarence moved as one, brandishing the beautiful blade. With it, and with all that Weapon had learned in these past few days, he was truly invincible. First, his observation focused, and just like in the dining hall, Every single movement of his foes was seen and understood. It began with the leader of Clan Rotrar leaping at him first. The weapon could tell he was slowed by the snow, and two others to either side were closing in with their own scimitars. Weapon didn't have the advantage of a sneak attack, but this was even better. If he took out the Lord first, then they would all crumble. For a moment, he wondered if he should ask them any questions before he slit their throats, but was suddenly surprised at the speed with which they swung. 4 blades, all aimed to kill, struck at him from every side, and Weapon spun his sword to meet them, slicing in a circle and deflecting every one. He had intended to slice the Lord's neck with that blow, but he dodged out of the way. No matter, 2 streams of blood marred the snow to either side as both of the other attackers were decapitated. 2 down, 28 to go. Weapon grinned, but somehow the enemy didn't even flinch. Lord Rotrar redoubled his efforts, and 4 more began to surround Weapon. Even his most wonderful counterswing would be too slow. Before it struck, he knew that at least 3 of their blades would meet his flesh, and so Weapon flung the sword up in the air and turned to his intangible form, just barely escaping the pain. He urged himself upwards, and reformed onto one of the big tree bows above him. These swordsmen were fast, much faster than any of the guards had been on the first mission. He caught the blade as it was falling and buried it into the tree. He would have to use it in a different way if it was going to work on these warriors.
Move past and kill the sorcerer!
To Weapon's surprise, the Lord gestured after Cully. Did he think that the forager was Weapon's master? 5 of the Rotrarian warriors obeyed, and ran past the tree, any sense and distaste of the cold burned away by their raw passion for battle. Only a handful of warriors Weapon had seen ever held such traits before, and now pretty much every one of the Markeltan Rotrars were in such a dangerous condition. Either way, both of Master Cernier's orders commanded their death, and so Weapon shaped his fingers into pointed daggers and flung them at the backs of the advancing warriors. 3 met their marks, piercing their necks with blinding accuracy, but the 2 others ducked with incredible speed at the whistling, and the blades skidded off of their helmets. Well, even their strange light metal worked against some of his glancing blows. Even as he had done that, many of the others were getting into defensive positions, reaching the base of the tree, and Weapon saw that 4 of the Markelts were lifting objects towards him. Though he'd never seen them before, he recognized them as a form of bow and arrow, though they had a strange mechanism within, and they were turned sideways. No matter, Weapon could dodge any spear, and bow and arrows were just mini-spears. He faced them and grinned, for they were next to die. However, as he prepared to counterattack with a many-speared leap, small and feathered arrows bloomed from his chest. Surprise pulsed through his whole being, and then streaks of pain tore through his very soul, and he shouted out with them, desperately entering the forbidden intangible form again to get away from it. How had that happened? He had been ready to dodge 2 of the arrows and catch the others. He had seen the path they were to take, but then they moved so much faster than he could, even with his observation. Had the power of the world grown while he was sleeping in the citadel? Already the nothingness began to encroach on every side. He had to return, but now fear whispered with greater intensity within him. Even so, he pushed past it and reformed back into reality, climbing higher in the tree while in the shape of the squirrel amidst the red smoke of the broken flowers, and he saw that the warriors beneath the tree had advanced another 20 feet up the mountain.
Do it, before he resummons the shade!
The voice of the Lord carried far, but Weapon had missed the first part of whatever that order had been while he was in the intangible form. However, what it had been was quite clear, and that was that they were still trying to kill Cully. Clarence had already stopped laughing, and Weapon could tell that he was also worried, though his fear was for Weapon more than anyone else. 5 had been slain, and there were still hundreds on this mountain. If Weapon was going to win, he would have to use everything he could and not make a single mistake. He observed once more to see if any more arrows were being prepared, and saw the 4 Markelts at the back of the group slowly loading their bows. No, whatever those things were, they weren't like any bow that Weapon had ever known. Whoever carried them needed to be slain first. Fortunately, their anger was so raw that they hadn't bothered to see if their dead allies were salvageable, or to even ensure that Weapon was dead, which allowed him to execute a proper sneak attack. He leapt out of the tree in the squirrel form, the blade held in his mouth, and shifted into a new kind of winged form as he fell, with 2 dark and webbed claws spread out from his back as he grasped the blade with 4 hands in front. He had judged the distance correctly, and as he brought the blade down, it split the archer in front of him directly in 2. Such light armor was as nothing to such well-handled weapons. Before the others could even turn around, Weapon performed the flurry of swings that he'd shown to Cully, now perfected over the night. The 3 others fell in a moment. One cleaved through the side, the other lost his head, and the third was fully bisected. Immediately, Weapon leapt backwards, dodging the swift blades of the others, and shifted back into the squirrel form as he caught a nearby tree, disappearing from sight by scurrying up among the crimson smoke above. There. That was a wonderful strategy. He would strike and disappear, eliminating them little by little, and inspiring greater and more intense fear into each one of them with every attack. All he needed to do was ensure they had no others who could attack at range. Despite everything, Weapon couldn't help but feel utterly invigorated. Danger unlike anything before was here, but so long as he could keep Cully safe, he could always reform from any blow. A large and muscled man from Markelt, one of the remaining warriors, raised a hollow spear to his lips, and a deep droning bellow like the buzz of an enormous fly filled the landscape. What was that? It didn't seem to hurt Weapon, but he knew it must have done something. He leapt to another tree, ready to perform another perfect ambush, this time on the Lord, when more creatures began to breach the outside of his observation from the top of the mountain. About 8 of them were human, but there were 2 others that were much larger and on 4 feet, creatures that Weapon had never seen before. Worst of all, they were cutting off Cully from escaping. He had to save him. "No, the Lord is more important," Clarence hissed. "If he dies, they crumble. We know as much. Do not let him escape." Weapon looked back and forth, precious seconds wasting away. Maybe if Lord Rotrar died, the others would ignore Cully. He leaped out immediately, sailing above the Lord and driving the blade down at his throat. Suddenly, he observed 3 claws shooting towards him, each attached to a rope held by Rotrarian warriors, but he couldn't change direction in the air fast enough. They gripped him as the blade was mere feet away from Lord Rotrar, digging into his flesh with painful spikes and pulling him aside until he fell to the ground. The greatsword fell from his hands and spun away, landing at the Lord's feet, and the 3 who held to the rope claws crouched to the ground, pulling him further down. Weapon quickly morphed away from the claws, shifting into a mass of flesh before reforming several feet away. He grabbed one of the 3 ropes, yanking it from the wielder and letting it pass through his hands. In one swift motion, he spun it and slammed the claw side down into the unarmed Rotrar's neck. The others approached, and Weapon shifted into the 4-legged form with many arms.
"So, this is the blade of House Theron. Pillaging magicians know not how to use such wonders."
The large man of Markelt swept up the sword with an elegant spin and lifted it into an aggressive position.
"I shall lay you to rest, and your unholy presence shall forever be cleansed."
A new feeling pulsed through Weapon. This aggravating man had taken the greatsword from him, after he had spent so long learning how to use it. Now he dared to try and hurt him with it. Well, this fool had no idea that Weapon had already claimed it for his own, and there was no chance he would prevail over its true master. He launched forward, his many arms striking at anyone who approached. 2 more fell, but many of his blows glanced off of armor. Even so, he twisted and dodged the retaliatory attacks, until he was face to face with the Stealer.
"The glory of this kill belongs to Clan Markelt."
The man delivered a mighty strike downwards, but Weapon willed the blade, infused last night with traces of his own self, to turn away just enough for him to deliver a perfect blow, cutting straight through the man's chestplate and chest bones with an arcing blade made of 2 arms. Pride surged through Weapon as the thieving Markelt fell to the ground, but he immediately realized his mistake as Lord Rotrar made use of Weapon's blind focus, and he closed the distance, slicing once with each blade. The Flower Lord swung quickly, not as quickly as Lord Theron, but fast enough that Weapon couldn't shift entirely out of the way in time. 2 of Weapon's legs were sheared off, and the agony it had inflicted was deeper than the bolts, than the flame, than anything else. There was no choice left, no rationality and control, not with the voice of pain drowning out all else. Weapon shifted into the intangible form and leapt right into Lord Rotrar, just as he had with Lord Theron so long ago. This man would die. He had to die. Not for Master Cernier, not for Cully, not for anyone but Weapon himself. However, he had already used the shapelessness too much. The nothing engulfed at his whole being too quickly. It grasped at Weapon and threatened to tear him apart into true nothingness. Fear upon fear had befallen him throughout this battle, but this occurrence was hell itself. Weapon reformed, not within Lord Rotrar as he'd hoped, but far away from the band of terrifying warriors. Clarence's voice was ragged. I must survive." As he looked back at the group, he saw that a large portion of his flesh remained there, but he couldn't sense it anymore. It was entirely unlike his flung blades or the many weapon in the citadel. No, this fragment of himself was dead. He watched in horror as it began to melt away, dissolving into foul-smelling smoke. Then he hid beneath the snow, shivering. The wintry covering still felt the same as before, but now he knew that death was no faraway creature. How could Weapon be so powerful and yet fail so entirely? At this rate, they would enter the valley, and Master Cernir's commands would be unfulfilled. What did it mean if Weapon failed Master Cernir's orders? Would Weapon be punished? Would he be sealed away forever? Would Master Cernir hurt Cully because of him? The situation immediately pulled Weapon out of his distress. No, Cully was already in danger, and that was right now. He began to pull what remained of himself together, the blades near the trees rushing back faster than ever before. Even so, he had lost a whole third of his form, and the wondrous blade on top of that. If all he could do now was to help Cully escape so that they could all regroup, then that is what he would do. As he did so, another figure pulled back the veil of the crimson-colored sky, and Weapon felt yet another pulse of fear as Master Cernir spoke to him.
Jin, are you hurt? I saw a cloud of red mist at the pass, and there's a horrible sound, and you're quivering. Did you find the clans? Is Cullen safe?
They are strong, yes, but I live. Now please do not distract me or that fool will die. Is that what you want? Clarence was more curt and desperate than Weapon had ever heard him. Master Cernir's already pale face blanched, and for a moment Weapon could only hear his quick and panicked breaths. Then he spoke, and a true coldness spread through Weapon's form.
If it comes to choosing between him and the valley, you must keep the valley safe.
Then he vanished, the dark sky fully crimson again. Master Cernir has spoken. We must escape. Clarence sounded relieved, but Weapon's resolve became unbreakable as the beautiful sword. If Cully was still alive, then both orders could be fulfilled. He observed the land around him, and though he could only see a fragment of his original area of sight, Weapon saw that he was only moments away from failing. Cully was about to die in the endless void. No, he had failed too much already. With that, he lunged westward, desperate to change the fate of his friend, a fate that only held doom. Even as he did so, a new scream of fear rose up within as the familiar whistle of dual blades sounded from the blind spot in his observation, followed by the overwhelming essence of pain. As he felt his form be torn apart, the voice of Lord Ortrar shouted in jubilation.
Thrice into the void is your limit, fiend. You have nowhere to run.
How did he know about the nothingness? Those wonderings were his last thoughts before the blades cleaved through Weapon.
Every second felt like a lifetime to Cullen. He had faced dangers in the past, packs of lake wolves and passels of mountain boars protecting their territory, slippery walls that almost sent him plunging hundreds of feet to the ground, storms that engulfed him in snow, but all of those only threatened himself and Snuffler. These outsiders, whom he had almost convinced himself were merchants, truly desired to subjugate and control everything. They were no different to the monsters in the stories, and now, partially due to Cullen's own foolishness, they were going to attack the valley. He knew that if he were to think about that for any measure of time, it would overwhelm him, so he just focused on running through the crimson haze that hung like an evil omen over the thin pass. If Snuffler hadn't tried to follow them, maybe they could both get back to the ruins safely. They knew these mountains. They could hide and bring back a proper report. Then the Generates could do something to help them. They had to! But if the lord these monsters were referring to, the one who had called them to the valley, if that was Lord Cernir... Even as he denied it, his father's wisdom rushed back. If there was one thing that a snake can do well, it is deceive. A cold dread pulsed through him as he stumbled through the snow. Not 30 seconds had passed before a strange horn blared from the forest. Hardly a moment later, Cullen saw something near the peak that made his heart stop, and he dashed behind a tree. There, not more than a few dozen feet away, were two lizards, each larger than a cow and moving slowly but surely through the snow, and being ridden by more of the outsiders. They were returning with a speared mountain boar, and for a horrifying moment Cullen assumed the worst, but this one was much smaller. That's good. She was safe for now. She had to be. The bigger problem was that there was no way Cullen could pass by them without their notice, not with how thin this stretch of land was. The best chance he had was to hide, and for them to pass by without noticing him. Cullen tried to calm his own breathing, but the thought of being pressed in by the band of armored warriors down the mountainside, and the monstrous lizards above made that very difficult. He peered out for a moment, and saw, to his horror, that the 8 warriors on the lizards had dismounted, and were searching every inch of the forest on the way down. That horn earlier must have been a signal. Now the only way to get past was to break through between 2 of the searchers and somehow outrun them, or to hay off of the snowstorming cliffside. Either way, his chance of survival was almost nothing. And yet, He thought, "It isn't nothing." If he used both strategies, breaking through at the very edge of the cliff, then he'd only have to surprise and outrun one of them, and he had something that could do the trick. He glanced to the westward cliff face, less than 30 feet away, and took out the bud infused with the lake wolf deterrent. Clutching the ebony stone once more for strength, he began his desperate ploy. The strange squawking cry of the lizards and the shouts of the men as they saw him made it clear this was his last and only chance, and he flung the orb at the edge of the cliff while running, right at the feet of a large man brandishing a twisted, giant knife sword. Cullen closed his eyes as it erupted, and he heard the pained shouts of the blinded outsider as some of the wood chips slashed through even some of his own arms and sides. As he passed by, he felt a hand grip his coat, and he knew it hadn't been enough. Cullen swung at the man with his pick and felt it pierce skin, causing the wounded outsider to let go, but it was too late. The others were closing in, the nearest only 10 feet away. Even so, he desperately tried to run, his eyes watering from the stinging smoke and from his wretched failure. Just as the blade of the nearest was coming down, a missile of brown hair and flashing silver slammed into his assailant, sending the bearded man flying over the edge of the cliff. He let out a strained yell as his form passed beyond sight into the swirling snowstorm below. Snuffler hurriedly grunted as she urged Cullen onwards. "You shouldn't have come here, girl. It's too dangerous." Even so, he'd never been more thankful for her than at that moment. They could make it. They could outrun these men. However, while that certainly was true, these outsiders' forces were more than simply human. The stories themselves had come to life, and the massive lizard in front of them expelled drops of fire from its mouth in a misty spray, burning Snuffler's eyes and legs. She squealed in pain, and Cullen tried to attack the monstrous creature with his pick, only to be smacked by its wide tail and sent tumbling to the ground. There the two of them lay. Their death was now all but imminent. Cullen's mind raced. The chance was very slim, but maybe they could survive if there was a rocky outcrop just beyond the veil of snow under the cliffside, though their lives might as well be in the hands of the spirits. He tied a rope around the pick in less than a moment as he bolted to his feet, grabbed Snuffler as best he could, and leapt over the side, slamming the sharpened steel into the edge of the cliff as he fell beneath the swirling winds. The pick held onto the rock for only a moment, but that was enough. He slammed into the nearly vertical incline, just barely hanging on as almost all of the wind got knocked out of him, and the pick fell further down, dangling from the rope. Snuffler had recovered and held onto the wall with her tusks, her wounded legs barely hanging onto the side. The forager drew up the pick still attached to the fallen rope and stuck it against the wall again, keeping himself up for just another few seconds at least. The winds howled, erasing all sound but the rapid thud in his ears. Every limb ached, desperate to let go, to get out of this freezing agony, but to do so would be death. And yet, with the rushing snow blocking any sight above or below, death and despair were all that Cullen could see. There hadn't been any ledge, and in their state there was no way they could climb up or even weather the storm till the outsiders left. Cullen had tried everything, but he'd failed. He would never see his father again, and the most he could wish to hope for was that the outsiders might treat the valley well, but he had seen their faces and all the fury they held. Even that faint light was denied to him. The tiniest and only glimmer of peace was that he would face death with his closest friend. Already his arms were trembling, and Snuffler stumbled, barely catching herself. Well, we're awfully high up, he thought with a final wry grimace. At least it won't hurt much. The last of their strength and the juts of rock beneath them crumbled away, and they both fell down, faster and faster. Snuffler squealed in fear, but Cullen could hardly make a sound. Visions were flashing past him, memories and spirits of old, and even a strange dark bird shaped like the moon that rushed after him. The Night Watcher. Then a slight outcropping of rock struck his skull, and he saw nothing more.